Oh, that always puts me in the mood, our theme music here. Anyway, all the podcast aficionados there, welcome again for another episode of FSUFO, also known as Forbidden Science. And today, my co host is Justin Brown once again, as he so often is. And today, do you know, Justin, this is just last week, I think we completed our 10th episode, just as a matter of history, sort of thing. But you know what? Today we're going to be talking about podcasts. I mean, on here at some point, as we usually do, we'll touch on all things UFO, all aspects. But I mean, today we're going to put the spotlight on the podcasting aspect of this. Now, here I am, 10 episodes in, and we're lucky enough to hear today to have a guest that's just completed 10 years worth. And I think he cranks about every week. And that person, of course, would be our guest, which is Martin Willis. And I can tell you that when I was looking for somebody as a great example to explore that medium with, when I asked around, because I confess up till now, I was drug, as you know, screaming and kicking into this, but already this many episodes in, I'm having a blast doing it, and no longer am a complete digital hermit. Okay, well, here's a guy who's like set a standard. And the thing is, when I asked around to all my friends and all my podcast fanatics, you being one of them, so many people, like, who should I be listening to? How should I get my feet wet and see what a podcast is? There were a million different suggestions, but everyone I asked, regardless of their persuasion and their view of the phenomena, came up with the name Martin Willis. And we're lucky enough to have him here today with his 10 years experience. And I know you know him well. And I don't know if you listen to them all, but I know you listen to many. And I remember hearing them in the car driving through Quebec with you before the COVID curse set in here. So,
Yep.
yeah.
I can't even keep track of all the episodes he does. And I think as a nod to Martin, I can say, in this introduction, hello, Christopher Free Radical
Mm,
Styles. This is a nod to a show that he used to do with his buddy Alejandro. And like so many podcasters, he got his start, big time start, like as a news guy, doing some news for Alejandro, and like I did with Jesse Randolph when he was in Chicago. And I'm just so happy to have Martin here because, like you said, the type of programming that he does provide is a nice, fair, balanced approach, and I think it's one that
yeah.
we really need to take into the future of the field.
Yeah, all sides agree on that. I mean, when I asked anybody about who I should listen to, his name always come up, and those who weren't way out there on the astral plane always said, he's the voice of reason here. He's balanced, he's fair, and you listen to his podcast, you're going to learn something about the phenomena. So
Absolutely.
perhaps we should. I think it's a good time to bring Martin on, where we can, I hate that expression, pick his brain. And boy, I could ask a million questions that should put everybody to sleep here saying, what should I do, Martin? What should I do? Anyway, welcome to the show and congratulations on 10 years of this. So, no doubt you're going to
Well,
have some stories to tell out of that.
yes,
Bravo.
thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And I'm really humbled by the introduction. Thank you very much. That was very nice.
Well, it's all apt. It's not a belly rub. You've earned every kudo you get, I'm sure.
Well,
So,
well, thank you.
let me start with the real basic one that's probably something that's normally asked further down the pipe. Why do you do it?
Well, I had a sighting back in 2007, and
Mm,
I had already, I hadn't really looked into the topic that much at all, but I had an insurance broker talk to me back in the 90s, that supposedly investigated UFOs in Vietnam, which I thought was fascinating. But until it happened to me, I was kind of on the fence about the subject. I didn't really know. And basically, it wasn't a dramatic sighting. I actually had a fireball sighting that was more exciting than my UFO sighting. But anyway, both times I was in the hot tub when it happened, and both times I was sober, just in case you wondered. but
That's still a
uh,
thing, is it? You're still asking that question?
yeah, that people do ask that. But anyway, something caught my eye, and it was a perfectly shaped disc, like you call it a flying saucer, whatever you want to call it, perfect shaped disc, It had a light blue glow around it. That's something you don't really hear about. And it was going in a like a smooth, steady, straight line, and not real fast. And the thing that really, the most eerie thing to me in the whole situation was because I had the hot tub. It was no bubbles. It was shut off. It was quiet. There was absolutely no sound. And I'm thinking, how is this thing moving? That was the most eerie thing to me at the time. And then it stopped, and then it headed toward Monterey. I was in Carmel Valley, headed toward Monterey. If I had a camera beside me, I probably wouldn't have thought to pick it up. Um, Although back then, there was very bad camera technology, if there was even a camera on my flip phone. But so I jumped out of the hot tub, and I didn't know what to do. I had no idea there was anything called like MUFON or any internet reporting, anything like that. So I called the police department. I said, I'm trying to reach the non-emergency line. And so I got into the non-emergency line dispatch, and I was just met with a lot of sarcasm. And so I was on hold for about 20 minutes because I just said, I just want to know, are other people seeing this thing? It's heading toward Monterey. I'm sure it's big. I saw it at a distance, and put me on hold for about 15 minutes. I got fed up, jumped off the call, and I thought that was basically it. The next Monday, I went into work, and I had someone that I was mentoring. So we had a like a close friendship, and I do fine arts and antiques, and this is an auction gallery. And so I I said to her, "Don't tell anyone, but I got to tell you the story." And like 30 minutes later, people were teasing me. So anyway,
Mm.
so several years go by, and a couple of years go by, and I started podcasting on antiques and fine art, and it was going really well. I was the number one in the slot of not too many people. Now there's a lot of people doing it, but at the time it was very highly listened to, and it's still up on the website. I mean, it still has a website and all that. I'm not real active in it right now. Anyway, I decided that. Out of a fluke that I would try. This UFO thing is pretty fascinating. I just wanted to know what it was. And, I've done 483 shows now, and on this subject. And I still have probably less knowledge about what it is, but some interesting theories, you
Hmm.
know. So I guess that was my motivation. And I thought, wow, this is a lot more interesting than podcasting about antiques.
What?
And I was thrilled with the intelligence of the people that I was talking to. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
what I was going to encounter.
When was this sighting, Martin?
It was in the fall of 2007. And
Hmm.
so I have looked it up. There is a website. There is someone that had a sighting
Hmm.
in the fall. But it's funny. I don't have the exact date. It's just a strange thing. I just don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a fall sighting in the Monterey area. They said it was a cigar shape. Now, if you think about it, if it depends on the angle of a disc, but it certainly can look like a cigar at an angle. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
Yeah.
it's the same one or not. Hard to say.
Well, the first thing I'd remark at, it's funny that they always jump to the consumption of alcohol, make that inquiry, because I
Yeah.
used to like Stanton Friedman's retort to that, which was usually drunks see UFOs too. And I can even take you to a little case that I know something about called Shag Harbour, where the very
Yeah.
first person there to call the RCMP, which was Lori Wickens, um, eventually 7 other people called the detachment. The first question they asked him is, Lori, what have you been drinking? And he said nothing. And they were reluctant to believe him because at the ripe age of 18, he already had a good reputation in the community for being able to put a few down. But of course, 6 people called right away. But it underlines that, drunks see UFOs too, as Stanton put it very unceremoniously. The other thing is, I love the idea of a sighting from a hot tub because
Oh,
there's a
me
great
too.
Canadian case. There's a great Canadian case in Montreal
That's
where
right.
70 people are in a swimming pool on the roof of a hotel in downtown Montreal, and they look up, and there's a UFO hovering in the cloud deck low over them that eventually involved police, military, and whatever. It went on for hours, a power failure in the city and everything back in 1990. So, that's good. But if I, get any choice on my next sighting, I've had a couple in my life. I'd like it to be on a pool, on a hotel thing, or at least a hot tub.
Yeah. So you can
And
relax, take it in. Yeah.
yeah,
That's right.
When I started this podcast, I was working an appraisal for antiques and estate in Atlanta, Georgia. I was working with a Canadian appraiser who lives in the Montreal area. And I said, well, hey, I just started a podcast on UFOs. So I don't know what you think about that. And he started telling me, he said he was out in the Montreal area where he lives on his deck at a party at his house barbecue with like 20 people. And this disc flew right over, again, no noise, but all of a sudden they heard the fighter jets coming. And the fighter jets
yes,
like caught up to it because it was going slow, caught up to it, and then it shot off, and they all saw it. The whole gang of them saw it.
Wow.
And he said he was shocked to see that there was nothing in the papers. That's all he was looking the next day. He said it
hmm
had to be in the papers. There had to be a lot of people, but nope, nothing. So
yeah,
Yeah,
and
seeing this type of thing really does trigger like a change in your thought process and your life in small ways too, which is sort of a great segue to ask, like after your sightings, like how did you, so you just, what did you remain curious? Did you reach out to other, it sounds like you were trying to make connections with people about what you had seen. How did it lead to Alejandro and you
oh
doing the
well,
news segment? Did you
Alejandro.
start your show first?
No, I started my show first, and
Okay.
Alejandro and I met in North Carolina at a conference. Now I knew of him, and I listened to some of his shows, and he and I met at a conference in North Carolina in 2013. So I started in 2011, so I was a couple years in, and then eventually I asked him to be on my show to do the news, and I was surprised that he said yes. And then eventually Jason was with him. I
Yeah.
can't remember the gal's name, and Jason
McLennan,
kind of,
Jason McClellan,
yeah,
and oh gosh, I can see
was it
her face
Melissa?
too.
Yeah,
No,
no.
Maureen
Anyway,
Ellsbury.
what was her first name?
Maureen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, they split off, and he asked me to do the news, so we were on each other's show doing news regularly, and then he got super busy, and that's he's busy now, but
Yeah.
I just spoke with him the other day. He's doing well.
So that helped
Great guy.
cross promotionally. That helped both you guys. That's great. He's a
Yeah, I
nice
mean,
guy.
there were people that were listening to my show that found it through him, and vice versa. It worked out really
Exactly.
well, and I totally agree that cross pollinating, so to speak, is a very good thing to do with podcasts. It helps everyone,
And
as long
especially in
as
this field, when
mm,
you're trying to put, not push a narrative, but like push the dialogue further and expand the concepts rather than keep it in that alien box, right?
right. Yeah, and of course, you mentioned earlier there is a fringe element to this, uh, unfortunately. So you have to be careful where you're going and who you're helping. That type of thing too.
And
But
when you say it, your
what's that?
timing there, your timing's pretty critical. It's like, when do
Yeah.
I say this? Maybe I'll wait till I'm off air to express my opinions on this one.
mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The people that recommended me listening to your show, they often pointed that out, by the way, that you have standards,
Yeah.
and that, you would rein somebody in or kind of give them the hook at some point, rarely so, but when necessary. And I'll tell you, you're respected for that out there. And
Well,
it was
I'd
one,
tell you, I did. Yeah, I did
mm,
something I never thought I'd ever do, and I did tell a person. I asked him one more time about a situation, and I ended up saying, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go," and I dropped him and took calls the rest of the show. That was a severe situation, and I have someone coming up that I know that I'm going to get into things pretty tricky about, but it's a pre-record, it's not live, and I'm going to really push him on some things and see what happens. But
mm.
yeah, when
I,
he
I was,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I'm just going to say, actually, I'm looking forward to that with some of our future guests down the road. Not that
Yeah,
I'm looking for confrontation, but I
exactly.
think extraordinary claims should open you up to require not necessarily extraordinary proof, but to give some explanation, some plausibility, right?
And the
It,
field, requires this two-sided dialogue, which you guys are really good at doing. So, any way we can have that two-sided conversation and hear these people out, I think that's just as important as, the criticism, right? We need to hear where
yeah,
these people are coming from because we really don't know a lot about it after all of this time. After studying all of this for so many decades and years, we're still, like you said, after all these episodes, you're still unclear about how to answer this question.
hmm,
Right. I will tell you, there is something happening though that I've seen mostly within the last year and a half, and that is there's a ton of new people looking into this topic. And
hmm,
so most of my shows, I bring up the subject of be careful, be careful where you're looking, be careful if you're looking on YouTube and thinking everything you're looking at is a real UFO, stay
Mhm.
away from, and I'll even name the channels to stay away from,
hmm,
because a lot of them is just clickbait, and there's a couple of them that make a lot of money by, CGIing out things and putting hoaxes and with a little bit of really good stuff mixed in,
Are those
enough to.
brothers? Are those brothers still doing that, Martin? Those
I
two.
have not checked for quite a while, but I'm sure
You know who I
there is.
mean?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, one of them was in my chat room a while back, defending himself. So, but
Wow.
anyway,
Yeah, there
hmm.
it is, right? That's the whole bag. That's ufology right there. You
yeah,
get
Well,
all kinds.
yeah,
in the past, I've sometimes referred to the situation as mixed up as a dog's breakfast. And, recently we had a guest on the show, Chris Rakowski, and
great
he had
guy.
a different definition. Yes, he is. It was even harsher, and I had trouble recovering from the laughter where he said, well, you're being kind of kind. It's more like it passed through the dog twice. And I thought that was pretty
Yeah,
harsh. But he said, listen,
yeah,
sometimes it just makes you pull your hair out, these people that have these elaborate theories and none of it's evidence based. You know what I mean? And for a guy like
yeah,
him that works so hard at cases sometimes, right? I consider myself lucky because the first case I looked into was Shag Harbour, which appeared to be worthwhile. And the thing
I
was,
guess so.
when I
Yeah,
first started looking, I couldn't Google anything up. There was nothing. It's hard to believe. I had no choice, as they say, but to get out of the armchair and throttle a few people and chase them down and just become obsessed and learn from my mistakes. I made plenty of them, but what a great time it was through the 90s there. So
yeah,
listen, a slightly different question, and I'll drop that thread there. That's how you got into it, and it's a cliche, but it's such a reason. I suppose it was really mine in the end. Why do you get into it? Well, seeing is believing. 10 years later, will I be here 10 years later? 10 years later, you're still doing it. So why? You must be getting some satisfaction, some fun, some insight. You may not have an answer, but you can still gain insight, and what
yeah,
the great guest you had, you must have. And
yeah. I
Great
really,
question.
yeah, I think, well, first of all, if someone's out there and they think it's a money thing, it's not a money thing. I make enough to cover, off YouTube and off supporters, enough to cover my graphics and things like that. And I took a trip out to Arizona and purposely to record out there with MUFON boot camp, stuff like that.
mm,
But it's not about money at all for me. Never has been, and I never like to do anything. It's same thing when I paint. I never like to paint a painting thinking about money. It takes all the fun out of it. So it's a passion, and I think what has kept me going, because there was a lot of feuding with some people that I was pretty good friends with between them, and I thought, well, maybe I'm going to step away from this for a while, but I stuck with it, but I had considered it, but for the most part, it's the people that I have met through this. It's been a gift. There's been so many gifts, and I could even tell you a couple of them. I'll tell you right now, one of the best gifts. Okay, I am um, seeing a wonderful girl. wonderful, the best person I've ever known in my entire life. That all started from her listening to my show and connecting with me. And we have the strangest story. We were born. It's hard to believe. It's as crazy as a UFO. We were born at the same hospital. Um, my mother had diabetes, and we had to be born in Boston. Her family lived in Boston. We were born at the same hospital, and we were born exactly to the minute, 1 hour apart. I was born at 7:37 a.m. She was born at 8:37 a.m. on the same day, in the same hospital.
Hmm.
And we found this out after, but that is the by far, if I didn't see a UFO and that didn't happen, that whole part of my life would never exist. But there have been some other great things, and one of them was I connected someone that is very well known in the UFO world, that came out of 30 years of not talking about it, and someone contacted me asking for his information, and it ended up being an estranged daughter, and they connected together and they talk every day, and
Wow.
they're back in each other's lives. And she found him because he was like very quiet and hidden away. She found him through my podcast. To me, that's worth doing. You know, the show. Those two things are worth doing, the show and staying at it. Right there.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll change gears a little bit because this is just bubbling over in my mind just with the recent news and stuff. And we're talking about the future of the field and all the relationships that you've made. And I guess we never really targeted your perspective, but we'll get to that hopefully here sooner than later. This whole development now of the UFO field after Luis Elizondo and To the Stars. Now we have this Airborne Object Identification Management Synchronization Group, this new governmental
Wow.
group now. Yeah, what an awesome acronym,
Mm.
eh? AOI MSG. Like,
Yeah.
what is that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's interesting now that we've got a whole other group. We've got the director of national intelligence now, Avril. I want to say Avril Haley, and she's like in charge of all of those intelligence organizations in the states. And now she's come out publicly in conferences and online and stuff saying that, you know what, we really do need to consider this phenomenon more closely, and that it might be extraterrestrial in nature with the Occam's razor perspective. There really, really has been a shift in the way we're treating this subject. Chris and I have had long conversations about this, and the concept of using that as a threat has sort of been a gateway to get this funding and this interest involved. Because let's be honest, we don't really know what these things are doing or what they're up to, and they have immunity, right? They're traveling through space with impunity. What do you think of the future of the field at this point and these newer organizations getting involved? Like Chris and I talked today about the fact that some of these people who are out there talking about this with great authority have no real belief in historical context when it comes to this field, and they want to push the threat narrative all the way to the wall. How do you feel about the future of the field?
Well, first of all, uh, if they don't think a threat is having our nuclear weapons shut down, all the
Yeah.
way back in the 1960s, that's unexplainable. What was it, 8 or 12 warheads, whatever it was, all independently wired and all dependently programmed, and those all shut down unexplainably when a UFO was over the missile base. If they don't think that is a threat to national security, then what is? And and the one thing that I think is kind of crazy in this whole thing is they don't want to look back any further than 2004, and they're saying it's because of the data that's available.
Hmm.
And I think that is just silly. I mean, and hopefully that will change. But I think it's going in a really good direction. I don't know if a lot of people saying, well, does this mean disclosure? I don't, and I've thought this all along. I really do believe when we're talking the United States government anyway, that they probably know more about what this phenomenon is, but I don't think they know what it is. That's my opinion. I
Yeah.
don't think there's
I
some. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just I'm just nodding here and agreeing with you. Like I don't think they have any ultimate answers. They know more than they're saying. They know more than they release. I'm not sure that they have answers to any of the big questions here. Um, this limited disclosure so far, it's disclosure with a small d. It has meaning, right? But when you see it in perspective, in a sense, they've confirmed what we all knew out here, and they up till now had wanted to turn a blind eye to. The military, like many conventional scientists, have been remiss. I'm amazed how many times when I get them alone, they come up to me and want to schmooze or something at some convention. Those that would sneak in and buy a ticket at a MUFON convention, and they'd say to me, you know, we really like what you're doing. You respect the scientific method and all this and that. And they tell me about a UFO experience they have or their belief, but they will not put their name to it or come forward. Well, you know, science has been remiss, and so has the military on this. And when you consider their mission, the defense of, North America, the United States, it's hard to fathom. It's hard to fathom. And the thing is, when you ignore history, then you, like the cliche says, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah,
So hopefully that will change. Hopefully there'll be an open mind, but they could learn a lot from history, or maybe there are things in history they don't want to see released. It'll speak of their short and even shorter insight into this in the past and mismanagement. The other thing is too is when you look at how other nations deal with this, I mean, the openness in places in the past at key moments when there was a UFO event in France or Chile. Sometimes not so much our government. We kind of got out of the UFO business, but the thing is, it depends on where you're at. There may not be an official stance, like, say, in our country at the highest level. But like I say, it depends on your position. If you're an air traffic controller, if you're an RCMP officer in this country, you don't get the luxury of disbelief. If you're looking at that screen and you got an object, a bogey there, and there's no transponder code, and it's approaching a jumbo jet with, 400 souls on board, you know, suddenly you don't get the luxury of disbelief, right? You have to deal with that reality. If you're an
right.
RCMP officer, you're sent to a crash site like they were in Shag Harbour. You don't get to say, we're not responding to that, whatever. And that's where we're lucky up here in the north, because we have a national police force that acts sometimes as a municipal police force and a provincial one, and they're held to a very high standard. They don't fill a gas tank without filling out a piece of paper, and it becomes a record. But yes, they're remiss, and the U.S. is not the only place that is. And I'd like to know all they know. They know more, but I don't think they have any big answers. I don't think there's any treaties or any of this speculation of with aliens as such. But there's more to it. They know there's more to it. They've been remiss in their duties, and with their budgets that are in the billions and who knows, probably trillions nowadays, the black budgets, then you know they're probably a bit embarrassed, and so they should be.
They
Anyway,
should be.
you're the
Yeah.
guest. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I mean, well, often think the number one reason they have tried to do things like the Robertson panel in 1953, and then
Mm.
all along, and then the ending of Project Blue Book in 1969. And, of course, things were still going on. They were still, taking in the information. But imagine this, okay, we're the US Air Force or the Canadian Air Force. We can't protect you. We have no idea what these things are. We can't protect you. Do you think they're ever going to
Mm.
say that? We have no way to, uh, you know, help you if these things, obviously there have been no attacks on the earth or whatever with whatever these things are, but still they have no control over them. And you two think they would ever admit that? I don't think so.
Well,
Yeah,
there have
that's
been
true.
claims of attacks in South America.
I was just gonna
Yes.
say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, for
And
the
Um,
most part,
abductions too. If you listen to those stories, right? These people are being taken against their will. If this is in fact what's actually happening, right?
yeah.
And
I
no
mean,
control over that.
I'm just saying, like, if this technology, it could come here and destroy us that's what I'm kind of getting at. It's not. It hasn't happened. We haven't seen any sign
No,
of that happening.
no.
Hmm.
Well, everything would change in a day should that happen,
Let me just
Yeah.
stay on track here with this small d disclosure because this is really good stuff. Um, you know, for a long time, I think a lot of researchers have recognized the concept of private industry getting involved with government agencies and studying this phenomenon, which would sort of shed a little bit of light on why it's been so hard to get documents and data out, right? Because when you're a company, you can keep that stuff safe and never let it out. So that's what I'm getting to is that there's a lot of talk now, specifically with Luis Elizondo and his belief that the government is in custody of these UAP materials. Jacques Vallée, has come out and said, listen, there are people studying this stuff that have been recovered from these sites. Um, just having this stuff out in the open and having, larger news organizations reporting on this is a form of a disclosure in a sense, right? I think that most people just want this to be this big fairy tale story that ties up all the loose ends. But the real fear is that, we might have snippets of this big picture, but the reality is that we really don't have a good grasp on what's going on here. I sort of feel the same way about that you do, Martin. When you spoke to Louise in the past, did you guys talk about the metamaterials?
We did, and he can't come out and say yes they exist, but he can kind of hint at it. And I have something to say too about him if I can continue on.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Continue.
yeah. First of all, he was going to be on my show in 2 weeks, and I got an email from his wife saying that they are in media blackout right now because he's working on his book and his publisher does not want him to be on any show. So he'll be March, near the beginning of March. He said I'll be the first podcast that he goes back on. He apologized, but I listened to him on the Theory of Everything podcast with Kurt. I can't remember his last name. And I suggest people listen to that podcast because he says something extremely interesting in that podcast. And so one of the first things I'm going to ask him about, and that is, he said, what if he posed it in a question? He goes, what if that there's some other, and we're not the top of the food chain. We're not at the top of the intelligence here on Earth and never have been. There's something above us, but it's so far above us that it's like we're the ants. And what if, now this is, uh, I'm giving you the gist of what he said, but these aren't his exact words at all. But along those lines of what if there's something that has been here, and I don't know if he's hinting at like an energy or something, or what if this is what at least some UFOs are and what we think they are. And I thought that was very, very interesting, and I can't wait to talk to him about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, obviously, these things are way above our pay grade. We are not top of the food chain. Let's
Yeah.
get real here. I've never seen anything like this. Like, I think the debrief.com came out with an article the other day, and they were like, individual one person UFO to be tested in 3 weeks. And I go on it, and yeah, it's a disc, but it's got 4 rotor blades on it. Like, that's clickbait. We don't have anything near this kind of stuff. And maybe, yeah, in Black Budget, they're working on this type of technology. Maybe there's some form of it. But these guys are, whatever they are, it is much bigger than we are. And that could just be the tip of the iceberg, right? And we don't know what we're
Yeah.
dealing with on the whole spectrum, whether it's physical or not. Like, who are we to say at this point?
And going back to what you were mentioning, a lot of times when you hear people speak about um, that are looking into this topic or newly looking into this topic, say like a government person that is talking about, the Congress. I'm trying to think exactly what it's called, the threat identification or whatever it was called.
ATIP.
They
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, they uh, when they're talking about it, they'll say something along the lines, well, these could be, China, or these could be Russia or something like that. But they totally discount again the history of, when things were clocked at 20,000 miles an hour in 1955 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
They completely do not talk about that. Or, my friend seeing a triangle craft floating over them in 1978. If we had that technology somewhere, if we had that technology since 1978, do you think it could be hidden that long? It's the size of a football
Hey,
field.
listen, what about the Renaissance paintings that are painting the exact same things we're seeing right now, or cave paintings? They look identical to the things people are reporting and even
Yeah.
taping now. That's where it gets real hairy, right?
You
Well,
know,
How old are these things?
mm,
yeah. So the Renaissance paintings, I'm not really sure about that, because there's some type of iconology that was used in those. I mean, that it could have been, it may be able to be explained. I'm not really sure about that. But
I
one
can see that.
certainly looks like they're looking up at a UFO, a dog, and everything. It's really
That's a
quite
good
an
one.
yeah.
image.
Yeah.
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 One of the things that gets me too is when these people that ascribe the possibility of, Russian or Chinese advanced technology. I mean, I look back at Shag Harbour, of course, in '67, where you see something that was clearly, and nowadays, with some of the recent witnesses we have found, which are bulletproof in terms of their involvement and their observations, like Isabel Tower. Um, Obviously, this was a flying disc. Now we know, not just the satellites, and that it was both aerodynamic and hydrodynamic in '67. Boy, that would have been sure useful a few years later in Vietnam. Would have been quite handy to have. And you know what? We didn't have such a thing then as what might have been thought of as a flying sub. And we don't have it now. And I think we're
Yeah.
unlikely to have it with our dense atmosphere and the foreseeable future of our technology. But how quickly they'll dismiss the premise, that whole body of evidence, the history, you know, like that line they drew recently in the announcement saying we're not going to look before such a year. You know, if you ignore history, you're doomed to repeat it. And
That's
we
right.
haven't gotten any close to any real answers in the past, and this will inhibit us in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless, I mean, there could be something new will happen, but we can't count on that. It's always so elusive. We'll never know.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, and the
you know,
interesting part of the whole phenomenon too, as an aside, there is that whole valet approach. If you see what he's done and others have done, like Chris Auback with Wonders in the Sky, these cross-cultural stories of their own versions of you could claim that it was their era's version of the modern UFO thing, right? The fairies, the incubus, the succubi, the old hag of Newfoundland here on the East Coast. All of these things sort of feel like a retelling of the original story, right? Which also, I mean, the hard part of this sort of stuff is it's historical and you can't prove it, but the stories still exist and they're preserved by culturalists. Like we had a guest on the show whose big thing was preserving some of these cultural stories of these strange things. It gets real murky when you start going beyond. Maybe that's the reasoning with 2004 too, right? Putting a date on that is because we have a way of measuring data in a way that they didn't have before that. But even 60s, 70s, 50s, 40s, like people had radar, people were picking it up, people were seeing it. So that leaves a bit of a weird taste in my mouth about that whole historical ignorance.
yeah. Yeah.
mm.
The old term, throwing the baby out with the bathwater type of thing.
But
Exactly.
in the end, it always comes down to interpretation, even when you apply science. It's like the law that way. You looked at the Condon Committee report that Martin mentioned in '69 that ended Blue Book. When you read that book, to me, it's never made any sense. I have a hard copy of it out there. And, when you read the book, first of all, what I find is there's a number of cases in there that are unsolved. There's the case of the Trent photographs you read through at the end where it says very clearly this obviously is not a hoax and represents a large object being filmed in the sky, whatever. And yet at the end, they conclude there's nothing worthy of scientific study and
Mm.
recommend to shut down Blue Book. I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, Shag Harbour, again, they never identify the cases, but I knew right off which one it was in there. But when you look at the case studies, there's a number of very solid unsolved cases, and yet Edward Euler Condon, comes to the conclusion there's nothing worthy of scientific study, and they should get out of the UFO business.
Right. Right.
Makes no
Yeah.
sense.
No. No. And unfortunately, that's as we move along, I wouldn't be surprised if something happens similar to that again. I mean, maybe
Yes.
this could happen in the next few years in the United States again. Well, we're closing this because there's nothing to it. This new. Now, we had Thanksgiving here, and I saw like a million headlines come out about the Pentagon setting up this, and you said the title of it. And what was that
Yeah.
title once again?
AOIMSG. I'm trying to like come up with a way to say it. Oi message. I don't know, but Airborne Object Identification Management Synchronization Group, AOIMSG. Something.
MSG, monosodium glutamate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, wow,
AOIMSG.
a
Yeah.
mouthful. But so I'm going to dive into that. I'm going to dive into that for sure and find out
Thank you.
exactly what's going on there. But we had the Thanksgiving last couple of days, and I just have not been looking into too much. But
It's so fresh too, right? Like this is just
yes,
within the last
they
week and stuff.
released it on Thanksgiving Day. It came out
Oh,
in the headlines on Thanksgiving Day.
is that right?
So yeah, almost
Let's
makes you wonder.
let's keep that track going with some of your guests and your research there. Like, who are some of the most prolific guests you've had on recently? Because I mean, you've been following this stuff like right on point. When there's somebody coming out with something new or somebody respectable in a governmental field or even researcher, you're the first one to get them on the show, and I have so much respect for you for that. Who are some of the recent guests that you can't speak more highly about?
Oh well, when I had my 10th anniversary show, I had over 40 guests come in there, and these were all people that either meant something to the show. I did reach out to several more that didn't get back to me, like Chris Mellon. I was the first one to interview him, and
Right.
a few other people like that. Jacques Vallée didn't make it, and James Fox was stressed out and too busy. So those are the type of people. But for as far as I think these people like Lou Elizondo, I think he's very important. A lot of people in the UFO world kind of, bash him because I think there's some jealousy going on there, which is very unfortunate. I think
Hmm.
that, um, you know, uh, he's done nothing but tried to do, a lot of good. And I asked him the last time he was on my show, what do you say to the people that are claiming that you're a disinformation agent? And he got really emotional about it. And I have heard through a close friend of his that he does take everything to heart. He's thin skinned when it comes to the UFO people
Mm.
bashing him, which is rather unfortunate. So I think he's very, very important um, out there. And I do not in any way think that he's trying to cause any
Mm.
disinformation. I don't believe
No,
that for a minute.
those reactions are just a result of being passionate. The thing is with him, I mean, if his work and his group had not managed to have that leaked information come out, we would have never had, for what it's worth, one way or the other, the release from the Pentagon. It
That's right.
preceded it, and I don't believe it would have happened without it. The only criticism I have for him, which I find a little odd, I've never met him or talked with him. He's one of the people in the field I haven't. I'd love to someday. Um, and I understand things are different in the U.S. than where I live up here, but like the only criticism I really have is when you see him when he talks about, he's discovered another witness or whatever, and he can't ask the fella because it would violate the security oath, to ask this witness or to do that. Oh hell, I ask people to violate their security oath all the time, but I leave it up to them. If they say no, no means no. You have to be ethical. I don't hound somebody, but I leave it up to them. I mean, they might want to be that brave soul, that starts to change us, that helps us drag UFO reality. I don't understand, and that's really puzzled me. He said, well, I can't really ask the man because he'd have to ask. Well, I'll tell you, when I get these guys, and I know this is the man who's been there, in my case, at a dive site or at a crash site or whatever, and he's already put his name for it, I'll ask him anything. And if it violates his oath, it's for him to answer or not. When he says no, when he tells me to go away, I'm gone. You have to be ethical. We should never harass people. But at the same time, I'll ask the question and leave it up to him and honor that answer. And hopefully you get one. But I know myself that, if we're ever going to get beyond what you're going to get, with a fresh faced investigator or researcher coming up with a stack of forms and getting to fill out the paperwork, at some point, we have to, it's like I'm so few times have I ever granted anonymity. I tried to explain to a witness, to someone trying to help, the significance, how important that is if we're ever going to change this, get rid of the stigma, make it safer for others. But in the end, no does mean no. But at the same time, hell, I'm going to ask the question. You got to go for it. And
Right.
particularly because these people are dropping away from us, the chances to get near these real answers. And I don't know, perhaps that's unfair, but I know when I can, I ask it, you know. Um, that's my only criticism. But make no mistake, if his group had not done what they did, we wouldn't be talking about the worth and merits, which are arguable, open to interpretation. There would have been no Pentagon release. There would have been no reason, no impetus.
Right. And that has triggered so many different things. It's triggered scientists into actually
Sure.
thinking this may not be a bad topic to look at. Kevin Knuth, for one, a university professor of science, saying, "Hey, I want to be in on the ground floor of this thing." I mean, which is he made the analogy of this. He said, "We used to go, we meaning him and his colleagues used to go to a science convention once a year, and they said that they had this crazy guy over there that was talking about earthquake lights, and we all thought he was absolutely out of his mind, nuts. Well, come to find out, it's a real phenomenon, and this guy was groundbreaking. He said, "That's what I
Mm-hmm.
want to do with UFOs." He said, "I'm not afraid to put myself out there." Same with Dr. Michael Masters as well, an anthropologist professor, who actually his book that he wrote, he thinks that we may be visited from the future, which is another interesting take on this. And he has this whole thing worked out. And I just talked to him the other night, and I said, well, if we're being visited from the future, if that's part of this, is it possible that we as humans have gone extinct and a new species evolves, in millions of years from now, and comes back to visit us? I mean, and he goes, yeah, that's very, it's quite a theory, and it's just another one in the ball of wax of all the theories of what UFOs and encounters are.
Yeah, and that's one of the most fun parts of the field too, is like speculating, right? Data is really important and all that kind of stuff, but it's nice to have the other side, this little group of people that like to speculate. Like, what if we are the byproduct of the original species, right? And a lot of people like Mac Tony's now, who is now gone, he's written a book called The Crypto-Terrestrials that he sort of wrote as a joke, but I think that sort of discussion is important too, on some level. I mean, it's not going to prove one way or the other that it's happening, but it is important to keep our mind open going forward in the field.
Yeah.
You were talking about Luis Elizondo a minute ago. Uh, I come from a more abrasive historical context in punk rock than Tom DeLonge does with his pop punk, but I always appreciate what he had to do. He's still tweeting about his involvement in Louise and ATIP and all that. If it hadn't been for him, none of this would have happened. Did you have a chance to talk to Tom on the show? I can't remember if you did an interview
No,
with him.
no, never
No.
had. I've reached out to him, and I reached out through his sister, and then Alejandro had a chance to talk to him a few times and put in a good word, but he just, he never came on. It would have been fun to have him on. I did watch him on a podcast where he didn't do well, and I
Yeah,
think after that they kind of like said, "Okay, no podcast for you." So
yeah. I think that was Joe
um,
Rogan. Maybe they gave him the
it
cane
was,
after
yeah,
the guy.
yeah. Yeah, so he
Yeah,
said a couple things that didn't help, and that's the thing we all need to stay on track and not there's enough interesting things in this topic without over speculating on the thing.
Chris will be the first one to tell you he's got to pull me back sometimes. He's like, whoa, let's just talk to these people first here. What are you talking about? Too much
Mm.
Well,
overthinking.
one of the things about speculation that I don't do near as much of it as I used to. First of all, when I first got into thing, I was quickly obsessed, and I spent a decade and a half obsessed, and then it kind of came down a notch to passionate. And I'm still in that part. But one of the things that speculation is that one of the things I felt I proved. People like Jacques Vallée have suggested that there's such an aspect to UFO experiences and sightings as reality transformation, which I've looked at and am more comfortable with turning into what I would call um, the acknowledgement of controlled witness perception by the phenomena. And we've had cases up here, and oh boy, we could go on for hours about this. That's a topic for another show. But Justin knows what I mean. I believe I proved that this aspect of the phenomenon is a fact here. We've got cases, really sound multiple witness police cases, where it's very demonstrable that this is a factor here, that people's perceptions are being controlled. And the trouble is, if you accept that, if you look at the evidence and you find it accepted, then all speculation, everything we think we know in terms of our actual, even the raw observations, becomes suspect.
Mm.
And that's pretty daunting. That's um, I cannot say, and I hope it isn't the case, that this aspect applies to all UFO experiences. I don't know how many. I suspect it's actually a small percentage. I hope it's a small percentage, because that casts everything into doubt, as to, just the basic facts. So everything we've written down, from color, duration to the event, whatever, all become suspect. So how can you speculate? How can you draw a conclusion if you can't be sure of the witness perceptions? We know it. We know it's an aspect in some cases. I sure hope it isn't many.
Well, you got to also look at it. If it's a mass sighting, their perception, and people document what they saw. It's not all about you could absolutely have people saying different things, but close enough. Do you know what I mean? I mean, and
We have them saying completely different things in police
you do.
cases. Completely
And they
different.
and how long after the sighting were they interviewed?
Well, there's different cases. In some cases, 10 years later. In some cases, the next day. But this has been an aspect on a few cases we found up here. It's really puzzling, but it's really certain. I mean, I've one famous case here where it's gaining more and more attention. It was an RCMP case here in Metro in the 70s. And a woman calls and asks the RCMP to come to her house, and they do, because she says there's a UFO over my house. It's near midnight. And when they arrive, the officer knocks on the door and says, if you want to step outside and look, there's actually three over your house. And he stays there 2 hours watching it with them. They list the next door neighbors as a witness, but when I went to the next door neighbors, that they, years later, they didn't even remember this at first. And I pushed and I pushed, and the guy's wife says, "Oh, dear, you know what it is? That was the night." Now, first of all, these two people hated each other. They weren't really neighbors. They lived opposite each other. I won't get into the details of that, but they were not friends with each other. But when the guy realized what I was talking about, he says, "Oh, yes, I know what you mean. I shouldn't have said that about the neighbors. You got to understand, we don't get along. They warned me about that." And he said, "But I know what you're talking about." And I said, "So you remember that night when, I said, "So you did see a UFO?" He said, "No, I did not." And I said, "Why did not?" "Because they were up hiding under the bed, him and his wife." He said,
Huh.
"I'm not very proud of it. I was terrified." By the way, this guy was a naval architect for the military, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And he said, "No, because the house was shaking like an earthquake." Meanwhile, the people next door were outside in the front lawn. There's no sound. They're drinking coffee, watching this UFO for 3 hours. It's in a police report. But the neighbors, they're upstairs thinking the house is going to collapse right next door to them.
Jeez.
you know.
That is
And
bizarre.
when you find more witnesses again, the perceptions are different again. And I have several cases like this up here where we find this. Now these are rare, but I look at how many cases I've looked into in Atlantic Canada, Martin, right? But you see what I mean? Like, some of these cases, they're very pure in the sense that, there's no way there could be a collusion between these people. I mean, for so many reasons, right? And, when you look at that, once you realize that you're dealing with this, and thankfully, I'm hoping in some cases, it throws all, not just the speculation, but the facts that are reported into suspect. But obviously, the cool thing about it, though, when you think about it, is once you establish that you have one of these cases where, everybody interprets it differently, it's a pretty strong indicator that it's a genuine UFO case or something paranormal. You know what I mean? It can't be mass hysteria. It can't be whatever. You know, when you start getting like these observations, multiple police from different locations watching this, you know, radar, whatever, it's a powerful thing, but it's very daunting for our role as an investigator to make any sense of it, right? And it's a strong warning for being too quick to jump to speculation. But since you've had so many guests and so many things, I'd love to ask you, what's the weirdest story or UFO case you've ever encountered in 10 years as a podcaster? It's got to be
Oh,
Here we
good. It's going to be
buckle up.
good. Yep, buckle
there's
up. It's
so
going to be good.
there's so I actually like the weird ones the best because they
Me
they
too.
seem they seem like more authentic. Um,
Yeah.
so, well, just one. I'm a big fan of running into people and somehow feeling comfortable enough to talk. It's much easier now than it used to be. Being in the fine arts field, I didn't want to be out there in a house looking at really nice high end art and say, "Oh yeah, I do a show on UFOs too." But so, but I love running into people, feeling comfortable about it, and then them all of a sudden telling me, about their UFO encounter. That's fascinating. Instead of like out in the mainstream, they never talked about it before, but they're going to talk about it now. So I guess one um, it, it's just bizarre. This guy is a friend of mine. He's on the Antiques Roadshow, and he's known all over the world basically for his specialty. And I was sharing an office with him down in Massachusetts, and he uh, we were in a conversation one day, and I said, "By the way, I don't know if you look on the internet or whatever, but if you do, you'll see that I do a show on UFOs." And he looks at me, and he's a real sarcastic guy, but he was all of a sudden became really serious. He says, "Well, they're real." So I go, "Okay." I always say, "Okay,
Yeah.
continue." So he was at Amherst uh, College, and he was in the tower. They have these tower dorms. He was in the tower dorms, and he says, "I'm not going to say that my friends and I didn't have a few bottles of beer, but," he said, "all of a sudden, one of the five of us yells, 'Hey, look!' And he said, this perfectly shaped box item with lights on the corners blinking just floats right in a couple floors down. It's just sitting there." And so they're staring at it, and they're all right up to the window and checking it out. And I don't know if they made phone calls or whatever, but they're all watching it. And he said all of a sudden it just shoots up. No, he said all of a sudden we heard a fighter jet. We heard a fighter jet noise, like a afterburner, like really loud. And this thing just shoots up to the mountains, and the fighter jet is heading, he says instantly it's above the mountains. He said just like a snap of a finger. He said you couldn't even see it move. And then we were all watching it up by the mountains, and all of a sudden it burst into five lights. The object itself was completely gone, and it was just five lights in like a circle now instead of a box, and they were blinking back and forth in like a synchronized blink. And the fighter jet goes up toward it, and the thing shoots off. The lights shoot off all together, like they're all joined together. So I said to him, I think this is the most bizarre thing. I said to him, wow, oh my goodness. I said, how has that changed your life? And he said, I could give a, that's
Yeah.
what he said. That's his. So I talked to him recently about it, and I said, what did you
Mm.
mean by that? He said, well, they're out there. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And he says, I think we're all. He said we're all just planted here anyway. From them anyway. That's what I think. And he said, but I
Mm.
really don't care about any of that stuff. And you know, and that's so it. I think a story like that to me is pretty special. And I've had a number of them over the years, but I love to
It's
hear.
it, it's so honest,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you think about it, right?
right.
He just told you there's no gain, there's no reason. He isn't proud of it. He doesn't try to explain it. It did nothing for the witness, as Stanton used to say. There's never anything in it for the witness. Didn't do anything for his life. And it's like I say, hear people say, "Well, what did they do the next day in Shag Harbour?" And I say, the people went home, they made a sandwich, tried to figure out how they're going to pay the power bill. Life's
Yeah,
hard here.
yeah,
That's it.
Absolutely. That's like
yeah.
that story is like the perfect show, right? It's like mic drop right out of the gate. It's over. I it and like a mic drop, at the risk of running out of time, all amazing things go super super quick. So I want to ask you a couple questions before we do lose our time with you.
Sure.
One is I want to apologize for not buying the artwork I tried to work with you to purchase about a year or two ago. Most people
Forgot
may
all
not
about that.
know. Good, great. I shouldn't have even have brought it up. But
Yeah,
people should know that you are an artist. That's spectacular. Are you still selling your work or working on new paintings?
I have gotten this year is a banner year in the. A lot of people passed away, and a lot of I do a lot of my work in the Boston area, and I am just hammered. I'm going to be working day and night for. I have all these tax deadlines for people that so I don't even have time to do. Well, yes, I did go to Arizona, and yes, I did go to California uh, this last month. But I bring my work with me, and I do my field work, and then I have a ton of research to do. So no, the long answer that I just gave you is I don't have time to paint right now. But I did. All of a sudden, it dawned on me, wow, I could paint UFOs, and so that was kind of a fun little twist in painting. I
So the
enjoyed it.
value of all your paintings just skyrocketed, is what you're trying to tell
Well,
me?
I have to die
I missed the
first, but
boat.
yeah.
So the second thing I wanted to ask before Chris comes in and closes the show is, you are super super busy. You did mention before to us that Louise, Elizondo is upcoming in the new year. Do you have any conferences, or what are your big plans for the show, or for what's going on with your life in the ufology department?
Well, I have done a lot of things lately. And so right now I was hoping that I could, have like a plan this whole next year in conferences and just hit as many as possible. My friend that I mentioned earlier, she's game to go to any of them. So I'm hoping to do as many of those as possible. I always love the connections at those
Awesome.
conferences, but I don't have anything right now booked at this point
Have
as
you ever
far as
considered writing a book at some point about your experiences
I get asked
as a
that quite a
podcaster?
bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get asked that quite a bit, and I did come up with a concept, and that is to take some really interesting guests that I've had over the years, and have them each write a chapter. And
Wow.
so, I'm thinking about doing something like that at some point, but not a book on my own. I would probably do, a long forward in it, in what kind of along the conversation we've had today. Like I
Hmm.
still have no idea what the heck's going on. So,
That's awesome, man.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So that's it for me, really. Uh,
Hmm.
You got anything else, Chris? You got any big pressing questions for Martin?
I don't think big pressing questions, although I should apologize that I think the last time I was on the show, I forgot that him and I had physically met in Shag Harbour.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had no idea. And I think all I could say is I meet a lot of people. I did. And I was shocked to hear that because at this point I'd started listening and I looked at you and somehow it just did not connect. But I did
Yeah.
look at an episode of your show there. I had to catch the your 10-year anniversary one there, and in all the little
Mm.
blocks, I think I saw Kevin Randall, and
Yes.
hearing him talk about one of his books, he gave me an idea for my next book. So I've just got to
Oh,
convince myself I got to make up the time and do it. So again,
yeah.
your show has inspired what I think will be another work, to add to do a third book in the genre, which in one way I was hoping to avoid. And here comes the music from above. Well, look, Martin, it's been such a pleasure having you. I knew 10
Thank you.
years of perspective would kind of jazz up my mind a little in that. And I'm glad that Justin was here to help because he's so familiar with your work.
Yeah.
But I
Right.
know, honestly, whenever I asked about you or what should I be watching, your name inevitably comes up. And yeah.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you.
So, and I
Thanks.
will get hold of you and let you know when these are to be released, when this comes out of the ether, and
Yeah.
hopefully
Sounds
somebody's
good.
watching. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for a lot of you out in the world listening right now, some of you might not know, but all three of us, like a lot of people who get involved in this field, have had our own UFO experiences. It
Seeing
could
is
happen
believing.
to you too.
Yeah. You know the
That's
trouble
right.
here in Nova Scotia, Martin? Too many people walk around with their hands in their pockets looking at the ground. I go, take your hands out, look up. Look up.
Or
No,
get in a
they're
hot
looking at
tub.
they're looking at their phones. That's what
That's
they're
Yeah,
right.
they're looking at their phones. How right you are.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, Martin. Thank you so much.
It has
Thank you.
indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Take care.